Starr, good to see you. Good to see you sitting still. You are such a bundle of energy. You're always on the move. Thank you for making time.
Always for you, Walter. Always.
So we've known each other for a long time, and I've just loved watching you on your journey and how it's unfolded over the years. We both came out of public schools teaching, and our paths, I don't think either one of us would have guessed how the journey has unfolded. But I think it's been driven by our passion and what we really love. And so I'd invite you first and foremost to share your passion with the audience.
So I would say that over the years, I've kind of been honing a real specific passion that has come up, and it has ebbed and flowed throughout the years. When I was in the classroom, I was all about the kids. I think at the heart of my passion in education, it's really about giving students the tools that they need. Giving learners is probably a more accurate way of saying it, giving learners the tools that they need to be really engaged and have agency in their own learning. So whether it's children's students I'm working with or adult learners that I'm working with, always kind of finding a way to connect with them so that they feel the impact of what we're doing. They understand why we're doing it, and they have a huge say in the what and the how of what they're actually going to be accomplishing. And in my career, I would say that it was very much like I had a crazy idea about something. I had the opportunity to test it out. I was able to build really good relationships with the learners I was working with. So most of the time, even the pushback was appropriate and helped me get better at what I was doing. But at the end of the day, I think that my learners always had a voice in that space, and that's something that's really important to me. Really uplifting the folks that I'm with in a way that makes sense for them. And whether it was in the English or journalism classroom, where a lot of this started at the high school level, where I did really cool things with my journalism kids in newspaper classes, and I started asking myself, why can't I be doing these things in regular English classrooms too, to give students all of that control over the products they were creating and the timelines that they were learning in, and then really differentiating my role in each of their learning experiences. So if kids needed me to be with them one-on-one, I was able to make that happen in class. If it was small groups, I was able to make that happen. If they wanted to be independent for longer than others, then I was able to make that happen as well. And I think that's also what's made me so effective with adults, because it's so important for me to work from an asset lens. So learning the folks that I'm with, what are they good at? And then really trying hard to create opportunities that allow them to lean on their strengths while they're building up the areas that aren't their strengths. And I've done that through job embedded coaching usually. It's my preferred kind of consulting. I am very happy to do professional learning. I do like doing that, which is also very experiential. I'm not a sit and get kind of person when it comes to learning. It's more like how do you like to learn and what kind of activities can I build so that you're fully engaged in your own learning and you have enough choice and voice in a session to really explore areas that you might be interested in but haven't been inclined to try on your own, with support if you need it. And then all other kinds of sort of how do we get you where you are to where you need to be? So feedback, one-on-one conversations, different ways to really help lift people up. And then, there are the sidebar conversations that I get to have with a lot of educators too, since I am a published author. A lot of folks reach out to me on social and are like, how do you know if you have a story to tell? What kind of publication, what publishers should I be reaching out to? And I would say that over the last 12 years since I started like actively publishing in the world, I really try to pay it forward. I had a couple of champions, Walter, you being one of them as well, Peter DeWitt being another champion of my work. And so since I was fortunate enough to have people who championed my work, I really try very hard to give back in that way as well, whether it's talking to pre-service teachers in college classes, when folks are using my texts, or, just if you're doing a book study around one of my books and you want me to pop in for a session, it's always my pleasure to do that as well.
How have you witnessed the evolution of careers in education when we talk about teachers having impact from the classroom and then beyond the classroom? That wasn't the case when we were both in the classroom, but everything has shifted. How do you see that?
So I mean, when I was in the classroom in the beginning, I would say that my secondary work was always something education related, whether it was I used to score ACTs for ETS, like which was actually a cash cow. That was a really good second income that I could do, and because it was asynchronous, I had a body of work and a window to work in, so I was able to do that. The irony of that now with all the work that I've done with grading and assessment and standardized testing, may have actually having having the foresight and the understanding of how those tests work as well as I do since I was assessing them might be also part of the reason why I've railed against them in, the recent past. But in the beginning, I did that. And I feel like also in the beginning, tutoring or SAT prep or all the things that like most teachers would do as secondary work. And over the years, I have noticed that stranger opportunities have sort of come my way, whether it's, consulting on different ideas about curriculum on the outside, adult curriculum too, not just what's going on here. And then also, I did work as a publisher for a couple of years. So, using my own writing experience as well as my teaching of writing experience to help grow authors and through COVID, learn about the publishing business and what that looks like on the other side when you have to do project management and work with an art team and work with different teams to kind of get things together. And I think that what I've learned over the last few years is that educators in particular have a very robust and flexible kind of skill set that is very desirable for a lot of different fields. And really, depending on the piece of the work that you like doing the most, that's really the way to find out where you might want to take it in another direction. I was recently having a conversation with Mike Anderson about this kind of stuff because he's talking about passion in education. And I never want to take teachers out of the classroom, but sometimes we need a break. Um, Especially post-COVID, I think that the education world has changed quite a lot, and sometimes if we wanna preserve the passion we have for the classroom, stepping away is the best thing we can do for a little bit, with the caveat of knowing that we can always go back and just give ourselves some time to refresh, get some different perspective. There are lots of CTE pathways in schools now, and with competency-based learning kinda growing, there's lots of different areas you could kind of go into a professional sort of world that's similar but different, but then you could bring that professional experience back into the classroom with you. So, as a journalism teacher, I could get media certified or get something with communications. And there are CTE pathways specific for those kinds of things. And then there are other programs like Educators Rising, which is about pre-service teachers and building pipelines in your own district through a CTE pathway for education. So, I mean, there are lots of different ways to kind of approach that kind of stuff as well. And with my new book, Making an Impact Outside the Classroom, I had the opportunity to interview a lot of different folks about the jobs they have now, which kind of range from nonprofit creator um, to prison. I think her official title was like prison superintendent. So she's running the education programs in the prison systems in Massachusetts. I've talked to a grieving father who turned his passion for educating youngsters about the impact of drug use and what it could do for them into a second career once he left the school and unfortunately lost his child to drug addiction. And all of those are on the playlist. So, like, I got to use my journalism skills and kind of really delve into the different things that folks are doing who left the classroom and were able to take that passion and really focus it and use it in different ways, but still school adjacent, if not in schools directly.
And so, in all of this, it's all very iterative. You're not one to present and just dole out information. You're not someone who presents yourself as I'm the expert. Let me tell you the way it is, or let me tell you the way to think. So you really engage your audiences, whether you're working in a building with a faculty or whether you're standing in front of a room of interested educators. Talk more about that in your presenting style.
So I would say I'm definitely an experiential slash hands-on kind of presenter, even in my keynotes. I never really like to talk for an hour. I prefer to get people thinking. And like on the flip side of that, with the job embedded piece, I'm not the kind of person to just inspire and walk away. I think a lot of the things I talk about are really hard to implement, and I like to get my hands dirty with the folks who are trying to implement it. And I want to be able to support folks where they are, acknowledging the challenge that comes with making the kind of changes I'm suggesting, but also getting into their classrooms, modeling different ways to do things, working with them to co-plan or give them feedback on assignments that they're creating for their students. It's also selfish because I love being around students. So like any opportunity I get to be in classrooms is something I really appreciate and enjoy. To that end, last year I did a keynote to kick off a school year at a district I worked in Maine, and they were really interested in inspiring the teachers. They had a rough few years and they wanted to celebrate all the good work that they had done. And what I did to make that possible so that it wasn't me just talking about my successes, I worked with the assistant soup to get the principals of every building to select a handful of people who have done really laudable things. I got some student videos of recent graduates that I could play during the keynote, thanking specific teachers for things that they had done. And I really wanted them to know that this was not a keynote that I did for every single district, by making it really about them and the achievements of their community. And the people in the audience, the best part was they had no idea that they had been acknowledged until their face came up on the screen and there was a video from a student talking about them, or a picture from the community from the outreach they have done in different ways. And, you know, you heard their colleagues applauding them as soon as their faces came on the screen, because again, the only people who knew were me and the administrators. So I really do want every learning experience of the communities that I work with to be very tailored to the folks that I'm working with. I work really hard to make sure that my experience can be best used by understanding the communities that I'm working with. So I ask a lot of questions. I want to understand the backgrounds. I want to know why, so that I could tap into that too when I'm working with their more challenging folks who may not be so willing to take those risks. And I guess I also have a pretty self-deprecating way about me. Like I've done a lot and I acknowledge that I've done a lot, but I'm also a learner. And so although I've had success, there's always more to learn and there's always more to be successful with. So I'm not afraid to try and fail and do it publicly. It's something I've grown into, I think. When I was a classroom teacher, I would say in years 0 to 5, I was very afraid of being wrong. And so I spent a lot of time really researching different things I was teaching, different books I was working with, looking at different modalities of doing things. Until I got to a place where I was like, you know what, it'll just be better to have this conversation with the kids or with the learners I'm working with and then make adjustments on the fly. So that's the other hallmark of any presentation that you see with me. I could come with a plan, but I'm confident enough to abandon my plan if that's what a room of people need. And so we could have a conversation, but if I see it's falling flat in the middle or there are other issues that are arising, rather than ignore the issues in the room, I prefer to embrace them and use that as a jumping off point to engage the folks who refuse to engage at the beginning.
And so takeaways from that. Any particular memories, anything that was a lesson learned, or anything especially fun that you look back on now with a smile and say, I didn't expect that, but that was quite a moment.
I would say I've had a couple of really interesting ones. For example, during keynotes, I've been known to use a four corners activity that forced people out of their seats and really just gauge their own philosophy, especially if I'm being called in to talk about assessment reform or grading reform in particular. Um, there are some really deeply seated, embedded philosophy and beliefs we have around those things. And I don't think a lot of people spend time thinking about where those thoughts came from or how they have embedded themselves in such a way, or maybe not even conscious of their own responses to kids when it comes to, let's say, late work or homework or, just grading in general. And it's very fun for me to unearth some of that and have some really interesting conversations. I think it's usually very eye-opening for communities where they suspect there's going to be a sticking point, and then when you have the right sort of antagonistic questions to sort of get people thinking a little bit outside, whether it's, thinking about their own schooling experience and
Mhm.
what impacted them as learners and how that plays itself out in the classroom now,
Yeah.
versus people who refuse to see alternative forms of assessment as a means to um, embracing kids where they are or even learners. It's scary. It's scary stuff. So I think it's important to have somebody in front who's not afraid to say, I tried that and it didn't work for me. And this is where I know I fell flat. And these were the corrections that I made in that moment. And even when folks see my TED talk, I always try to remind them, like, I have an empathy for anyone starting this work. We all start with a bag or a history of what we bring to this table. And it takes a lot of courage to confront that initial understanding and do something about it, especially when you know that the doing something about it is going to be very uncomfortable and potentially not as successful until you find a way that works for you. And that's what I love doing most. I love helping people find that pathway. So, when I think about the best ones, it's the ones where I had a plan, I totally abandoned the plan, and then what came out of it was a really positive learning experience that gave the learners in the room the courage to try something new.
And that's going to really work well for you when you walk into a situation talking about something as integral as assessment, and you may not know what you're walking into. What is the district history around this? What do the administrators really say when the celebrity speaker isn't around? What do teachers assume the expectation is, even if we're talking about blue sky possibilities? And so being able to read the room and adjust has got to be really helpful to you.
It is, and to be honest with you, Walter, especially with those conversations,
Yeah.
some people, if a system has tried to do assessment reform in the past, for some reason, this is the most, like, when we talk about grading reform,
Mm.
if it has been tried in the lifetime of any teachers sitting in the room and it failed,
Yeah.
they are very vocal. They are
Yeah.
very vocal, and it is hard to ignore them if you're in a room full, even one or two people who are like, "Ugh, we did this 12 years ago and it was an utter and complete disaster area."
Right.
And there are new people in the room who have no idea what they're talking about, but the memory is long. And usually when I start doing that work with schools and
Mhm.
they approach me for like grading reform, I start really asking some very specific questions
Yeah.
about the work that has been done before they brought me in,
Yeah.
other attempts, like, and it starts with clarity work. So if you haven't done learning targets and success criteria, if you haven't been clear on your objectives with priority standards, you cannot talk about grading reform until you talk about classroom pedagogy and what is actually happening in that space, because changing a policy isn't going to fix all of the stuff underneath it. And there's a very good likelihood that changing the policy and not fixing that other stuff, people are just going to ignore the policy. Um,
It's so I sum this up saying there's no substitute for the experience you bring to this. And the real professional learning are those conversations you're talking about having even before you get up there in front of an audience.
Absolutely. And the more people who could be involved, better. Um,
Absolutely.
right.
So let's take a few minutes and I want to stand back and just talk to the audience, look into the camera, and it could be any one of the wonderful topics that you regularly speak about, and just give them a sampling of Starr presenting.
Sure. So I would say that the thing that I am very passionate about is this idea that kids can, learners can. Something that is very offensive to me is when people start talking about what kids can't do or what learners can't do. And I find that most learners are more capable than we often give them opportunities to demonstrate. That I kind of learned that the hard way. I went through my own national board certification. When I went through that process and started really reflecting on my own learning, I started to realize the gap between what I knew and what I was able to share. And in that gap, I kind of realized how important bringing metacognition and self assessment into the classroom was, because no matter how well I designed an assessment, and in the beginning, I did not design them very well, as most people don't, unfortunately. Um, I learned that if I offered students the opportunity to learn how to articulate what they knew and could do in a way that was useful to me, I was better likely to understand those things and could adjust my instruction more appropriately than than all of the ways I was doing it before. So if I had the opportunity to do a workshop on this idea that kids can, we would spend a lot of time brainstorming about what they are already doing that is functioning really well. And from there, we would actually work together to build that out. Um, and the idea is that every person should walk away from a session with something tangible they can try, something tangible they can use, something to think about that won't go away 5 minutes afterwards, like a niggling question or idea that lingers to the point where you have to interrogate it further for yourself. And if I could do that, if I could even get you to think just a little bit more deeply about something that you took for granted in the past, then I really feel like I've done my job, particularly around the grading stuff, because like I said, that is a deeply embedded sort of feeling. And I don't expect to brainwash folks in the room to believe everything I say. What I want them to do is investigate on their own and find a pathway that works for them. And I think when you asked before, what makes me different, I really try to have a humility in the way that I present, and not be, although I'm being hired as the expert in the room, there are other people in the room who probably have a fair amount of knowledge, experience, where if I could find those people, capitalize on what they can bring to the conversation, and then drift myself into the background, then I've really been successful. I want the leaders and the teachers I work with to know that I'm there as a backup plan. But at the end of the day, my goal is to get them to not need me, as they're designing things and working with their students, and anything that I could do to help them do that more effectively, I'm happy to do.
And by managing the work that way, you provide professional learning that sticks. You've empowered them to take it and own it. And even after you ride out of town into the sunset, they have something they truly own and can work with. And you don't disappear. You're
No.
available to continue to have those conversations and make them feel supported. So um, I guess I should have said up front, I'm a big fan, so I may be kind of in the tank and saying all these things, but they're all 100% true. And you can see that from spending this time with Starr and getting to know her. Starr will be at our Elevated Teaching Accelerator in Cincinnati on Saturday, September 28th. So if you can make it, come to theworthyeducator.com and register. We'd love to have you with us. You get to meet her in person. And she's always on the go. So even if you can't make it to Cincinnati, look her up, come to the Speakers Bureau page, connect with her. We'll find ways to get you together and make the work happen. Starr, thank you so much. It's always an honor, and it's such an honor to know you and call you friend and colleague.
Thanks so much, Walter.